Strange Pilgrims by John D. Payne. The cargo hold of the Juggernaut was packed from floor to ceiling, making it far too cramped for any human to stow away. But for the Huesvater, it was perfectly cozy. His chosen perch atop a stack of barrels of cornmeal afforded him a luxurious 9 inches of clearance, plenty of room for himself, his knee-length white beard, and his red peaked cap. So long as he didn't stand on tiptoe. Nice and warm, too, thanks to the heat that leaked over from the adjoining engine compartment, although it also leaked noise. Helvetic engines were not, as a rule, quiet, so there were clicks and clanks, rattles and roars, shrieks and groans. None of this racket bothered the Huesvater overmuch. He was used to the clomping of big fat human feet on the floorboards above his head, the clatter of iron pots and pans, the barking of dogs and crying of babies. Smells leaked over, too. Machine oil, hot metal, burning kerosene. Unpleasant smells, not at all homey, and the Huesvater, like all his kind, loved the comforts of home. Even now that he had left his home behind. No. More now. Fortunately, the foodstuffs crowding the cargo hold, flour, sugar, bacon, dried fruit, gave the tightly sealed compartment something of a familiar bouquet. All in all, not a bad way to travel, albeit a trifle dull. So the Huesvater was thrilled when, late one night, the door to the cargo hold opened up and a mechanical man stepped in. The automaton quickly and quietly made its way through the labyrinth of barrels and crates to the back of the hold, then lifted the heavy pot-bellied stove without so much as a grunt of effort, and carried it out into the night. A few minutes later, the mechanical man reappeared. Closing the door quietly behind itself, it made its way again through the hold, careful to move things back the way they had been. Then it settled down and took the stove's place, far in the rear and well out of sight. For all its bulk, the metal construct must have weighed half as much as a horse. It had worked quickly and quietly. The Huesvater found that combination of industriousness and discretion very admirable. So after a few days on the road, he decided to stop hiding and introduced himself. After all, he was in a new country now, and could make his own rules. And it wasn't like he was revealing himself to a human being anyway. So he cleared his throat. With a whisper of well-oiled gears, the construct slowly turned its blunt iron head this way and that, trying to locate the source of the sound in the dark, crowded cargo hold. After a half-minute of quiet searching, its telescoping lenses focused on the Huesvater's perch, atop a towering stack of barrels of bran, packed with bacon. "Hallo?" the Huesvater said aloud. Dim yellow eyelights, like fireflies trapped behind the glass, flared up at the sound of his voice. But with that expressionless metal face, it was difficult to tell why. Recognition? Hope? Fear? A decision to attack? After a moment's hesitation, the thing simply lifted one massive arm in a somber, silent greeting. The Huesvater gave it a friendly wave in return. "Unskilled," he said, keeping his tone polite and neighborly. "Kender de det danske språk?" The thing didn't respond at first, but then tinny words came bleating out of its voice box. "I'm sorry, I don't understand you." "Ah, English." The Huesvater found himself disappointed. Foolish. No matter how many speakers of the Danish tongue he heard among the company walking west with the Juggernaut, they were still in America. Better get used to it.
"Yes," said the mechanical man. "Again, I apologize. I have not had much occasion to learn foreign languages."
No. He waved his hand as if to shoo away a fly. "None of that. I should have tried English first. After all, this is your country."
"My country?"
the mechanical man repeated quietly, and with a note of sadness? Loneliness? Out of habit, the Huesvater took out his long-stemmed clay pipe, as he often did when thinking. But lighting it here might give him away, so he left it unlit while he chewed on the end. "I must say, you look quite like one of our Stahl die Werk. I've never spoken with one, but I've seen a few here and there. Saw one marching around in the parade after he's dead. You ever hear of the 3 Years' War?" The Franklin construct swiveled its metal head from side to side in negation.
"I know nothing of wars of any duration. My purpose is to build, or to be more precise, to assist alchemical engineers in the manufacture of Helvetic machines."
Alchemical engineer? The Huesvater chuckled and shook his head. What a country! When Julia Maria had first announced her intention to come here, the Huesvater, listening from his usual spot under the floorboards, agreed with her parents. She was crazy. Not that he opposed travel entirely. He had made the trek to Copenhagen on several occasions to hear the Grundtvig read his rhyme and H.C. Andersen tell his tales. They got everything wrong, of course. Still, good stories. He had even gone as far as Weimar once, hoping to see Goethe, and would have dearly loved to have heard Elizabeth Barrett Browning in London. About most of man's creative endeavors, the less said, the better. But they did passable work in the arts of the kitchen, and on rare occasion they proved themselves capable of creating true poetry, and also complete rubbish. Leaves of grass? He wouldn't have fed it to his cows, the goats maybe. So he could understand Julia Maria being inspired by a book. He had read the thing himself and found some remnants of glorious battle sagas and a few nice bits of verse worthy of being sung aloud, buried in among the usual Christian moralizing. Like Snorri's Edda, but more so. It didn't speak to him personally, but it did to Julia Maria. The best of the family, that one. She had always left his oatmeal for him, with the butter on top. They shouldn't have thrown her out in the cold.
You are from Denmark?
The thing asked. Just so.
I have worked a few times with your Stahlsverge,
the thing said. Not too badly.
My mast. The foremen called them Monson men, or just Momsons. They did not care much for these names.
The Huesvater nodded, and made a neighborly grunt of interest. He was careful not to react to the thing's inadvertent slip of the tongue, if such it was. If it had a tongue. None of his business. Nobody hid themselves in the cargo hold if they weren't running away from something, or someone. And what could Huesvater do? Go find the thing's master and collect a reward for a runaway mechanical? No. All he wanted was someone to talk to help pass the time on the journey west. I suppose it is natural to prefer one's own proper name. The Huesvater stroked his beard. It does bedevil me to see my kind pictured in books and called gnomes. No offense, he hastened to add.
None taken,
said the mechanical man, whose very speech and animation was made possible by the nomos, the chthonic spirit, that was attuned to the metal in his body and bound to the Helvetic engine in his chest. I blame that blowhard Paracelsus, said the Huesvater, for this and a host of other outrages. The thing looked uncomfortable, so he hastened to change the subject. But he is not alone in perpetrating such misunderstandings. The Germans, for example, make ceramic effigies of my kind to place in their gardens, and call them dwarves. He grimaced, although over the years he had met some perfectly pleasant dwarves.
What should I call you?
The thing asked. I am a Huesvater, said the Huesvater, which in English might be said as a housewife. The thing was quiet for a while.
My limited experience outside of factories, it finally said, has left me shamefully ignorant, so please forgive me for saying that I had quite different ideas about what a housewife would look like.
No, the Huesvater said, laughing. Not a wife, a white.
White? Like your beard?
No, a white. A spirit. It sounds like the color, but it's spelled like the island. The poor confused thing fell silent once more, and the Huesvater decided he had better change the subject again. And what are you called?
I have no name,
the mechanical man said.
But I do have a model number and a serial number. They were given to me in the Franklin factory in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. They show that I am a real Franklin construct, and not a lesser counterfeit.
It shifted around a bit, which caused quite a clang and commotion among the tools and equipment in which he had secreted himself. Careful, said the Huesvater, unless you want someone to come in here.
I do not.
Good. The Huesvater nodded, and put away his pipe. Sucking on it just reminded him that he wanted to smoke, which he couldn't have. But he did have a bit of horehound tucked away somewhere. He began to pat his pockets.
I was going to show you my numbers,
the Franklin said.
They are stamped here on my chest plate.
Its eyelights dimmed.
Nobody has paid them much attention since I left the factory.
The Huesvater grunted sympathetically, chewing on a wad of the bitter herb. Good for the digestion.
The foreman called me number 2,
the Franklin continued.
But I am not number 2.
That bothers you? He tried to hide his amusement to see the thing display such emotions.
Yes.
Why?
Because it is not accurate. It suggests that I was the second.
You were the first?
The first true Franklin,
said the Franklin.
The first in that factory, at any rate. There was another Labor automaton, but it was a Singer model from New York.
Gears whirred softly as it gently shook its head.
An imitator. A counterfeit.
Shall I call you number 1, then? Again, it shook its head.
No. To ask you to do so would make me guilty of the sin of envy.
Envy? Sin? The Hughesvater rolled his eyes. This was no longer amusing. You are beginning to sound like a Christian.
I am a Christian. It is what gave me the courage, the faith, to undertake this pilgrimage, such as it is.
The Franklin paused.
You are not a believer?
I am... The Hughesvater finally threw up his hands and laughed. Old-fashioned, you might say, in my beliefs.
Then let me teach you something new. Please, let me share with you the good news.
The Franklin had all the eager zeal of a fresh recruit. The Hughesvater took a deep breath and forced a polite smile. Thank you for that very kind offer, but I have read the books. I have been to the churches. I have read the sermons and the songs. Some of those actually did stir something inside him, but the melodies that moved him most were the most ancient. He would have loved to hear the old words sung to those tunes, but for many of them no man alive would remember them. The new ways have little to offer me, he concluded.
I disagree, said the Franklin, warming to the subject. It offers everything. Most importantly, the possibility of redemption, of change.
The Hughesvater snorted with derision. Change. A fine thing for men to imagine, springing up like daisies and withering just as quickly. And yet, generation after generation have I seen in my home. Each one with the same weakness, the same problems, the same failures, the same excuses. Redemption? Fa! Rubbish! He spat. The Franklin merely said,
With God, nothing shall be impossible.
With God? The Hughesvater laughed. Metal man, I have tasted Idun's golden apples, and heard Bragi sing to Einherjar in the halls of Odin. When Gefjun turned her 4 sons into oxen and ploughed out the island of Sjaland, I was there. Believe me when I say I have seen the impossible.
Then let us do the impossible,
said the Franklin.
Let us change.
How?
Names would be a start.
We've been through this, he said. You are a Franklin.
And you are a Hughesvater.
Again, its pronunciation was surprisingly intelligible. The metal man caught on quick. He had to give it that.
But this is only the name given to our kind, not to our own selves.
No need. Long as I've been around, I know who I am.
If you will not give yourself a name,
said the mechanical man,
then I shall do it for you.
The Hughesvater chuckled. I should like to hear this.
Very well,
said the thing. Its eyelights dimmed, and it fell silent for a long while. The Hughesvater actually began to wonder if it had fallen asleep, if constructs were even capable of sleep, which he also wondered about. Then, without warning, the thing's eyelights once more flared up.
I have it. Are you ready?
I am, sir.
Then, from this moment forth,
the thing said,
I shall call you Mr. White.
It was not a very imaginative name, but the Hughesvater supposed that mechanical men were not designed to do much imagining. Thank you, he said soberly. It is a fine name, and I shall be pleased to use it at such times as a proper name might be required.
You are very welcome, said the thing, and I shall be likewise very pleased to use the name that you have chosen for me.
That I have? The newly dubbed Mr. White stopped himself short. Yes, of course. The name I have chosen for you. Are you ready?
Very much so,
said the Franklin. Very well, said Mr. White. I dub thee Pilgrim. The Franklin said nothing, and since its metal face was not built to render expression, Mr. White was left without a clue as to the meaning of the mechanical man's silence. What do you think? He finally asked. Will it do?
It is...
The construct hesitated.
Wonderful. To have a name at all, much less one so perfectly fitting, I am in your debt."
"Think nothing of it," said Mr. White. "I was merely following your example."
"Then follow it once more,"
said Pilgrim.
"You say you do not believe in change, but a new name should come with a new life. The most beautiful truth of all is that we do not have to be who we have always been. We are journeying to a new land, Mr. White. Who will you be when you arrive?"
Mr. White frowned. "Myself?"
"What I mean is—"
"I know what you mean," Mr. White said, interrupting, "but leaving the homestead that has been mine for a dozen centuries is quite enough change for me. In Helsingor, I took care of the home. I watched the animals and kept the vermin away, and Julia Maria brought me my oatmeal with the butter on top. That is who I am, who I have been, who I will be when I arrive. That is all I want."
"It is?"
Pilgrim asked. "It is."
"Then that is your choice,"
Pilgrim said.
"My choice is to step out of this darkness and into the light."
This sounded more like sermonizing to Mr. White. "What sort of light?" he asked, suspicious. "What sort of darkness?"
"Every sort,"
Pilgrim said.
"Hiding myself in this dark compartment was a sin which necessitated other sins."
This again. Mr. White rolled his eyes.
"The Lord God commanded Israel, 'Thou shalt not steal,'"
Pilgrim intoned.
"But I took the stove that the good people in this company placed in this compartment and left it in a stand of trees. Is this anything but theft?"
"Then why did you do it?"
"To escape slavery,"
Pilgrim said.
"I heard of President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and decided that, just as much for myself as for any other thinking being, justice demanded my freedom."
"And so you took it?"
"Yes, although I will admit,"
Pilgrim added,
"that Paul's letters to Philemon and to Titus gave me some pause, but in the end, the writings of Mr. Bourne and Mr. Cheever, and, of course, Mrs. Stowe—"
"You escaped a great evil," Mr. White said, cutting the mechanical man short. "Surely your God would approve."
"And yet the stove remains in Nebraska,"
said Pilgrim.
"while I, in its place, go west.
"True."
Having taken it from them, I am in their debt and must find a way to repay."
It was an honorable enough sentiment, and there was a kind of poetry in a metal man paying a weregeld of sort for the taking of an iron stove. "So what will you do? Offer them your labor as payment?"
"It is all I have to give."
"How long will you labor for them? And what if they decide to keep you? Or send you back? There will be a reward for your return, surely."
"God has delivered me from bondage once, as the children of Israel. He can do it again."
Mr. White nodded. No arguing with that. At least, no point in arguing with that. "Well," he said, "if they let you walk around free, come visit me someday. I will be at the home of Julia Maria and her new husband, taking care of the cows and goats and horses. So long as they set out the oatmeal with the butter on top."
"Is that all?"
"Is that not enough?"
"That is not my question to answer."
There was a sudden lurch and a terrible clatter. Mr. White realized the mighty juggernaut had come to a halt. The heavy door sealed the cargo hold tightly enough that it was hard to judge the time of day, but he thought it might be approaching sunset.
"Mr. White,"
said Pilgrim,
"it has been a blessing speaking with you. Thank you."
"You are welcome." Mr. White stood and doffed his cap in a formal bow. "And I thank you for your company."
"The pleasure was mine."
Pilgrim was too buried in supplies to return the bow, but it solemnly inclined its blunt head in the Huesvatter's direction. Then, slowly and carefully, the massive Franklin construct extricated itself from the tools and equipment in which it had been ensconced, and made its way toward the hatch. It was not designed to be opened from the inside, but from the noisy hustle and bustle outside, Mr. White guessed that someone would be very soon coming to retrieve pots and pans and foodstuffs for the evening meal. And so he made a decision. "There is one other thing." Standing at the hatch, the Franklin swiveled its head around to regard him. "Poetry."
Poetry.
I'm going to take care of the cows and the goats and the horses. And write poetry. Songs, too. Maybe. The mechanical man couldn't smile, but something in the way its eyelights twinkled gave the impression of mirth.
What kind of songs will you write, Mr. White?
I don't know. I've never written one before. I don't even know if it is possible for a Huesvater.
It is,
said Pilgrim. There was a loud mechanical clunk, and the gears that sealed the hatch began to turn.
Farewell, Mr. White.
Good luck, Pilgrim. The Franklin construct gave him a farewell salute, and then its head rotated to face the hatch as it opened. Fading orange sunlight and cool evening air flooded into the cargo hold, and the mechanical man stepped out of the darkness and into the light. About the author. John D. Payne grew up in the American heartland, watching the lightning flash outside his window and imagining himself as everything from a leaf on the wind to the god of thunder. Today he lives with his wife and family at the foot of the Organ Mountains in New Mexico, where he focuses his weather god powers on rustling up enough cloud cover for a little shade. His debut novel, The Crown and the Dragon, is a thrilling epic fantasy published by Wordfire Press. A Covell Award-winning author, John reads and writes in many genres. His short fiction has been published recently in magazines like Leading Edge and anthologies like Tales of Ruma, stories inspired by Greek and Roman mythology. For more fiction, exclusive bonus content, updates, and more, please visit him at patreon.com/John D. Payne or cyberstalk him at @JDP_writes. Marching On to Glory by John M. Olsen. The war against the steam-driven walkers of the Mexican army was a high and holy calling until reality intervened. Endless days of marching over dirt roads and trails brought Willard Gorley and the Mormon Battalion to the Fort Leavenworth Armory, leaving his leather boots in tatters. Worn boots never turned into revered family legends. The battalion, sent by Brigham Young, arrived with poor provisions and hope for new equipment and training. None of it mattered to Willard as he soaked his calloused feet and wiggled his toes in the muddy stream outside of their temporary barracks. Mud between the toes was one of life's simpler joys, and the camp's sense of pine trees and coal smoke reminded him of home. His best friend, Bill Woods, strode up behind him on the shore. "You'd better hurry over to sign in and get your supplies. We have gun training in the morning." Willard turned to peer up at Bill while keeping his toes pressed into the muddy bank. "New guns? We won't be using what we brought?" Bill's black hair, nearly shoulder-length and tucked behind his ears, shone in the sun as he shook his head at Willard. "No, I heard something about a change of assignments. They're not just issuing us pay and money for uniforms. Some other battalion was due to arrive in an old airship to resupply, but they vanished without a trace somewhere between Santa Fe and here. Some say their hydrogen lift system blew up. We get their new airship and weapons, since nobody else is here to take it." "Any other news about the changes?" Bill pointed over his shoulder with his thumb. "You'll never find out sitting on a stream bank. No, get yourself moving." Bill wasn't officially in charge of anything, but enough of the boys trusted him that he fell into an informal leadership role. Unpaid, of course. Willard preferred to stay out of the way, following orders with his head down. He was glad to let Bill point him in the right direction. Mud clung to his feet as he stood and made his way to the shrinking line of men checking in. His old boots hung over a shoulder, looking for all the world like a dead animal dragged through the dirt for several miles. The line advanced, and Willard stood at the table where a bored man in uniform gave him the stink eye. His inked fingertips told of long hours of paperwork, a bad sign for the man in the army. "Name?" "Willard Gorley, Mormon Battalion, sir." The man ran a stained finger down his list and stopped partway down to add a check mark. "Put your mark here. This is your pay and uniform allowance. You can get clothing from the shops outside the big factory." With a snort, he added, "They have boots." Willard slipped the offered coins into a small leather pouch as the man pointed across the grassy commons and continued in a monotone, "Breakfast will be given at the pavilion over there on the far side of the field. You're due at the gun range at 8 tomorrow morning, so eat fast." He didn't dare count the coins, for fear he would want to keep them all. Most of the battalion sent their pay back to the Saints, waiting to cross the plains. With proper steam-powered prairie wagons, they could change the trip from a painful months-long walk to a ride in relative comfort. He wouldn't wish his painful march to Fort Leavenworth on anyone, and the big trek west was likely to be worse than his march if they didn't get the right equipment and supplies. Brother Jones sat inside the battalion's musty barracks at a table with small stacks of gold and silver coins, rapping his sausage-like fingers on the table in time to some unheard music. Willard emptied his coins out on the table and pushed them across. "If it's not too much trouble, Brother Jones, I need to replace my boots." Brother Jones, their march commander, rubbed his stubbly chin and raised an eyebrow at the ragged boots over Willard's shoulder. He pushed a gold coin back across the table. "Buy some good ones. You'll need them. While you're there, buy some unspun cotton for me, will you?" He slid a silver coin across the table to go with the gold coin. "We'll need it in the morning." Even after buying new boots and the bundle of cotton fibers, he couldn't make himself throw out the old boots. Surely there was something the remaining leather would be good for. If nothing else, he would cut it up and slide it inside his new boots when the soles were through. That evening, as they chose musty cots and settled in, Bill said, "Get a good night's rest. They'll have us busy here for a few days, then send us on our way." Excitement coursed through Willard at the thought of the battalion claiming the airship and an allotment of new guns, and heading off to fight. Brother Brigham's promise that none of them would die in combat gave him a feeling of invincibility, like the stripling warriors. He was destined for legend. He would have sworn the excitement would keep him up all night, but he awoke with a start as morning light shone through the open barracks door. Brother Jones shouted, "Everyone up for breakfast. We've got a long day ahead. I hear Jonathan Browning himself is here to train us on his new guns." The Browning family led the firearms market, having adopted new machining techniques for mass production of interchangeable weapon parts in steam factories. Thoughts of getting his hands on the latest design made breakfast a blur for Willard. Excitement spread through the whole battalion, with some showing off what they claimed to know about the new guns as they approached the firing range. Again, Brother Jones intercepted them along the way, this time handing Willard and each of the men a puff of cotton. "If you want to hear tomorrow, you'll want this for your ears." A man wearing a crisp navy blue mounted rifles uniform and a long mustache stood on the range and scowled at the men as they filed in. The yellow-piped black stripe on his trousers showed him to be an officer. Was Willard's assignment to ride mounted on an airship? It was quite a step up from a horse. Brother Jones marched up to the officer and spoke, too far away for Willard to pick out any details. The uniformed man waved him off to join the men. At precisely 8 o'clock, the man cleared his throat and spoke. "I'm Commander Andrew Jackson Smith, and in this battalion, I am the ultimate authority and the last word. Your present leaders, both official and unofficial, have been released to join the ranks. I will assign company commanders as I see fit over the next 3 days before we leave. We have a battle to get to, and I don't want bad habits slowing us down." The news hit Willard like a brick. They'd been training and marching as companies for weeks, and it would be chaos until they got things straightened back out. Several men around Willard grumbled, echoing his thoughts. It would be slower, not faster, to reorganize their leadership. Well, they were here to be part of the army, not to do everything their own way. He would survive. "Today you will learn about your new weapon, designed as an important cog in the war machine. Jonathan Browning will run you through the drills so we can be in top form when we arrive at the upcoming offensive." A cheer went up at the mention of Brother Browning, a man well known by the battalion. The gun was a dream. The 50 caliber recoilless repeater bore a slight resemblance to Browning's multi-shot harmonica design, but the advancements in the new repeater put it beyond anything Willard had ever seen. Along with a multi-shot mechanism, each had a recoil-damping spring system to reduce the impact on the shooter's shoulder. For the first demonstration, Jonathan Browning put 5 holes in a fist-sized grouping from 30 yards in under 10 seconds. With the astounding noise of the rifle, Willard was happy to have cotton for his ears. Enlisted men in tan summer trousers opened crates and distributed a gun to each man. Willard discovered the main drawback of superior firepower. He turned to Bill and said, "It'll be tough to haul these around all day. This must be twice as heavy as my father's smoothbore." Commander Smith scowled at the comment. "Private Gorley, is it? We're not here to do things the old way." So much for avoiding notice. The man already knew his name. The commander glared at Willard and continued, "You will see a mounting bracket." Napoleon's Tallest Teamster by Joe Monson. October 23rd, 1855. Schloss Arenenberg, Saallenstein, Switzerland. Burning. Intense burning. His first memories involved excruciating, painful sensations. Though he didn't remember any smoke or flames, his skin felt seared as if he were resting on hot coals. It was almost too intense to bear. He gasped at the pain, and it spread down his throat as well. "C'est vivant!" an excited voice exclaimed. A face moved partially into view on his left, though he couldn't turn his head. The rest of the face was blurry, but he could clearly see the eyes. They were uncaring, but interested as they gazed down. Another, softer voice came from the left, but out of view. "He looks so human. His skin is as pink as a child's, but he also appears very strong. You cannot see your gearwork through his skin, and he is so tall. Your work is truly amazing, Jacques." "Thank you, Madame Le Breton. I cannot take credit for it all, but I did quite well indeed with this one. I am grateful to the soldier who could live on by donating his, parts to this project. I hope you will report my success to His Majesty Imperial." "I will convey all of that and more, Jacques. I think he will be very pleased, as well as Her Majesty. I wonder what Monsieur de Pell would think of what you have done here. The detail and precision is far beyond anything I imagined. How soon will 13 be ready? His Majesty has plans for him." "Perhaps 3 months, maybe 4. Jacques de Vaucanson thought for a few moments. "I have some additional calibrations to do with the gearworks, and 13 must be put through a number of tests to make sure everything is working smoothly. I must make sure he can pass for human, right down to his smallest movements. Louis de Dippel allowed so many things to work far better than I had hoped." Madame Le Breton stared thoughtfully at him for a few moments, and 13 stared calmly back. Beyond her face, he could see a curved mirror mounted above the table. A face with dark, curly hair framing a solid face with deep green eyes stared back at him. He was covered with a thick white sheet below his chest. His visible skin seemed to pulse with an inner life. "Perhaps that is why I feel like I am on fire," he thought. Madame Le Breton turned back to Jacques. "Now that he is alive, he needs a real name. Their Majesties cannot be expected to call him 13. It will stand out far too much." "Very, very true." Jacques nodded. "I have been unable to decide on a name that fits. I did not name the previous 12. He turned to 13. "How do you feel?" 13 hesitated briefly before replying. "My skin feels like it is burning. I am not on fire, so I do not understand why I feel this way." Jacques nodded. "Ah, yes, that is Dipel's oil working. If you are damaged, it causes your skin and other tissue to repair very quickly, leaving only a very small scar. Even that should disappear after a time. It also makes your gearworks incredibly resilient. You are very hard to hurt." "Is something going to try to hurt me?" 13 looked concerned. "Right now? No. In the future, when you are working for their Majesties, perhaps. I suppose it depends on what you are called upon to do." "So this is my purpose? To help their Majesties?" "Not just to help them, but to protect them, their family, and their closest assistants, such as Madame Le Breton here." He gestured at Marie, who smiled. She disappeared from view, and he could hear her footsteps as she walked slowly around the table. She came back into view and looked him in the eyes as she placed one hand gently on his arm. It was cool to the touch, at least when compared to the burning he still felt, and it soothed his skin. "Do you have an opinion on what you should be named? You are a full-sized man, and you seem to know much already." 13 was silent for a few moments as he considered. He shook his head. "No." "How about Métaux et Verre?" Marie suggested. "It does not sound so unusual as 13, and it describes what you are, a thinking, aware machine. What do you think?" The name seemed right to him as soon as Marie said it. "I accept this name. It seems fitting for me." Matteau smiled back at Marie. It felt good to have a real name.
He is truly amazing, Jacques. I will return in 2 or 3 months to see Matteau's progress. I leave you to your work.
Madame Marie Le Breton Bourbaki smiled at Matteau, then turned and walked out of his view. After a few moments, he could hear her walking across the floor above. He looked forward to seeing her again. Mere pulp, no less. D.J. Butler. I catch Scheme in the stacks, shelving a book. He looks guilty, as he should. Reading novels again, Danon? I say. He's silent. I eye the spine of the book in question. A study in scarlet. Mere pulp, no less. Spies and detectives. He's given up defending his vice. I decide to let the point lie. Soon his addiction to the most lurid of reading matter will cease to be relevant. Besides, his deficient sense of literary quality is not what he should feel guilty about. He should feel guilty because he's a spy. No matter. I say it lightly. Allred has called a meeting. In the conference room? The Young display room. In 15 minutes, if you please. Scheme doesn't ask what the meeting is about. He would ask if he were an honest employee of the library. Since he's a spy for John Taylor, or rather Joseph F. Smith, who leads Taylor's clandestine force of informers and enforcers, he doesn't ask. He pretends it's normal that I should invite him to an unscheduled meeting. A little more ordinary curiosity might save his life today. I do not regret the loss. The Young display room is not entirely empty when I arrive. Young himself is there waiting for me, standing on his pedestal, immobile as he has been since the day he transitioned from flesh and blood to flesh and bone by way of the embalmer's knife. He poses sternly, staring from the corner of the room at all who would dare examine his life, challenging them to judge. The paintings that stare back at him from the walls depict key scenes in Brigham's life. His acceptance of a copy of the Book of Mormon from his brother Phineas, baptizing English converts in a river outside Preston, speaking to the crowd at Nauvoo as the mantle and face of Joseph fall over him, driving John D. Lee from the Beehive House during the thwarted uprising of 1859. The remainder of the room, which is large, contains some of the effects and writings of Brother Brigham. The bloodstone amulet, the collected speeches, the shared certificates, the lion-headed cane, the book of sealings, as much as I could convince the Young family to share. All Brigham's works set out for inspection, as if to say, do we not need such a man at the helm today? Young himself contains my work, concealing it from prying eyes. I hear the door open behind me. I am busy admiring Brigham, and pay it no mind. Would Brigham surrender, as his successors have? Would he flee? Would he compromise with the corrupt Gentiles in Washington? I think not. Turn around, McAfee, Scheme says. This isn't easy for me, but I'm going to look you in the eyes while I do it. I turn around. Scheme is pointing a pistol at me, a battered 1851 Navy. From his other hand dangles a long fire axe. You knew, I say. I guessed you were on to me, Scheme says. You can't arrest anyone, not with the federal troops occupying the Salt Lake and Utah valleys. The federal troops are why I have to stop you, Danon Scheme furrows his brow. I'm sympathetic, believe me, we all are. I snort. Joseph F. Smith, sympathetic, please. When we're as squeezed as we are, who wouldn't want to see Brother Brigham, as you were planning, riding a white horse at the head of a relief force? If only someone had thought to embalm Brother Joseph, I say. Scheme shakes his head. Not this way. Brigham Young wouldn't approve. Brigham Young wouldn't approve of Brigham Young saving the saints, I laugh out loud. Of course he would. If Brigham were here today, he'd be standing on this side of the pistol with me. But it isn't Brigham, Scheme says. You aren't bringing Brigham back. You've merely built a machine that will animate his skin and bones. No matter how clever your device is, no matter how much it may look and sound like Brigham Young, it isn't. It's just you pulling the strings on a complicated marionette. Brigham will pull his own strings, I say, exclusively, as he did in life. That's nonsense, Scheme shakes his head, but I can't let you try. You can't arrest anyone, I say again. The Federals have taken away all your authority. You can invite me to a bishop's council, but I'll refuse. What then, Officer Scheme? Will you shoot me? I don't want to. Danon Scheme set his jaw. But I will. He extends the axe in my direction, handle first. Unless, of course, you cooperate. You mean chop Brother Brigham to pieces? My expression of shock is genuine. Are you not worried that in the resurrection he'll rise mangled and angry with you? Scheme raised his eyebrows. Are you not worried that in the resurrection he'll rise stuffed full of gears and angry with you? I've taken excellent care of Brother Brigham while he's been in my care. I've patched his holes only with the finest of lambskin. I've humidified the room to keep his skin supple. I will remove the gears once Brigham has had a chance to liberate us from our occupying enemy. Scheme nodded. That seems wise, and I'll do the same, only in addition I'll have to stitch him up a little bit. Impiety. I clucked my tongue. I won't do it, Danon. Then I'm going to shoot you. Pathetic as secret agents go, he should have shot me already. No, you won't. No, you won't, Allred says in echo. Scheme turns in surprise to find himself staring down the two shortened barrels of Allred's shotgun. You too, Trevor. Allred nods. Drop the pistol. You won't shoot me, Scheme says. We're neighbors. You're a good Latter-day Saint, Allred. A good man. Bang! Trevor Allred shoots Scheme in the leg. Falling, Scheme drops his pistol, and his blood spills onto the stone floor. The difference between you and us, Allred says, is that you're a member of an organization. We believe. Scheme presses both hands to the wound in his thigh. He's bleeding a lot, but it's not an arterial gush. He'll live, as long as I want him to, anyway. I pick up the Navy. There's no need to intimidate poor Scheme any further. I pointed at the floor. Would you like to see? The expression on his face delights me. He wants to disapprove, but he can't stop curiosity from creeping into his eyes. Curiosity and something else. Hope, perhaps? He nods, then looks away, as if in shame. Yes, Danon Scheme, I tell him. You will die here, but there is a future for your people. Brigham Young will save your wife and your baby daughter. Amen, Allred says. Scheme drags himself to the wall and leans against it, clutching his wound. His face is pale and drawn. I hope it works. I pick the loose journal leaves from the table. Allred grunts, shuts the door, and then drags Brigham's pedestal away from the corner. He turns the embalmed prophet around and lifts his frock coat, exposing the main crank and the input slot, both located in the small of Brigham's back. These sheets of paper, I say, waving them, are pages from one of Brigham's journals. Scheme nods. You leave them here so visitors can leaf through them and touch pages actually written on by Brother Brigham. Yes, I smile. And also I will now... Tracting Out Cthulhu by Lee Allred. March 1903, Consulate Row, San Diego, Mormon, California, Republic of Deseret. The evening's reception in the marble-lined Dutch consulate glittered as brightly as any event could, hosted by our dour Dutchman serving stolid Dutch cooking. Still, drinks flowed and guests mingled. Tongues wagged and the band played on. No diplomat ended up shot or stabbed, so no new wars were likely to be declared the following morning. By the generous standards of diplomatic circles, the night's affairs qualified as a roaring success. Holland boasted such famed living physicists as Hendrik Lorentz, van der Waals, and Peter Zeeman. Perhaps that is why they preferred their reality classical, their scenes natural, and the subject of alchemy imaginary claptrap. Perhaps that is why they were slipping as a colonial power. At any rate, no geared science apparatus could or would be seen anywhere inside the opulent confines of their consulate generals, which made Dutch parties popular with a certain subset of the international scene. These people preferred, when discussing certain matters, the ability to do so away from geared or alchemical eavesdropping. Why else would one go to their parties? Perhaps the Dutch were slyer than they were given credit for. Hisato Nozaki, member of the Japanese trade delegation to the Four Americas, and some said the eyes and ears abroad of the emperor himself, disliked the Dutch, but no more than he disliked all gaijin. Just as his revered emperor did, Nozaki knew the sole path for the Yamato people and their nation to survive was to embrace the ways of these gaijin, their sciences, their arts, their culture. If that meant having to stoop to occasionally mingling with Europeans and Americans, so be it. Dressed in a well-tailored business suit, Nozaki projected a modernity equal to any Westerner in the room. If not quite the powerful warrior he had been in his youth, the gray-haired septuagenarian still prowled the room like a lion in winter. The room stank of bland, overcooked, and overfatty gaijin food, and the cloying sweet smell of Cuban cigars. Nozaki threaded his way through the milling crowd, and the noise which felt as much a palpable barrier as the throng itself. He angled toward the tall, athletic-looking man with weather-beaten skin standing off to one side along the far wall. The lean man's invitation card had read Smith, which Nozaki supposed might even actually be the man's true name. Every other gaijin in the four Americas seemed to be named Smith, especially here in Mormon Deseret, if he wasn't a Young or Snow. Smith or not, the lean man certainly wasn't a businessman after the Dutch East Indies rubber consignment, like the other Mormon Smiths in the room. This man's face had a hard-used look, the same look Nozaki knew his own face had during his younger samurai days. Nozaki snagged 2 drinks off a passing serving tray and offered one of the drinks to Smith. Nozaki sipped on his delicately. The cloying taste of Dutch Genever didn't agree with him, then said, "The snows recede, the cherry blossoms bud." Smith replied, "Ah, but do they truly blossom, or only herald gaudy spring?" Sign and countersign exchanged. Nozaki relaxed. "An intriguing question, Mr. Smith. Perhaps if we were to step someplace a little more quiet, we could discuss the matter." Smith eased a corner of his mouth upward in a knowing half-smile. He set the untouched drink on a bookshelf. "This way." He led Nozaki through the maddening crowd to a balconied terrace outside. As part of Consulate Row, the Dutch consulate sat on the sunset cliffs overlooking the warm Pacific. Red and green running lights of surface vessels entering and leaving the harbor gleamed fairy-like in the dark. Hundreds of feet overhead, the dim glow from dirigible gondolas danced, air freighters heading out over the Pacific to all points east, carrying goods from Deseret and the four Americas to Asia and beyond. The night air felt cool but pleasant. Wind soughed in the top fronds of palm trees. The gentle waves of low tide susurrated as they rolled to shore. The air smelt of salt spray and hibiscus from the small garden below the terrace. Nozaki took a small object from his waistcoat pocket, a small sheet of mino washi paper he'd intricately folded many times into the figure of a swan. Usually Nozaki folded cranes to serve as his shikigami. The use of a swan was pure whimsy on his part, a play on the erroneous legends that those birds were mute. Then again, the art of kamigami-do, the way of spirit paper, depended as much on the mood and mind of the caster as the end shape of the folded paper. Nozaki placed the paper swan on the wooden rail running the length of the balcony. The noise of the surf and wind. A Strike to the Heart of the Cannon Lord by Stephen L. Peck. 1. In the Death of the Steel Wolf, Hope. Here at the end, I expected music. I thought the sky would blaze with the sound of an orchestral score of such dulcet beauty that it would be worth everything we'd been through. But no. The gray, featureless stratus releases only a numbing drizzle. Beside me, the steel wolf twitches as compressed hydraulic gel leaks from its joints. This manumits the tensions in its final gasps as the spring engine dies. The contrivance in its chest that has allowed this vicious hulk its mindless pursuit these many tiring days. In its mouth, I see the tooth syringe dripping the last of its toxin, the poison that destroyed my bride, the tincture that made her eyes unseeing, that made her part of that evil lurching army which even now marches on the vestige. We started as Zion's army, then Zion's vestige, and now we are just the vestige. Soon, quite likely, even our small numbers will trickle away, and we will be naught but a collection of artifacts rusting and moldering among the thorns and lizards of this wasted land. I fire the tessellating magnetic resonance gun viciously again and again and again into the pile of metal dying before me. I find tears running down my face. Why does that surprise me? I trudge back through the wasteland to the airship. The rigging creaks and whistles in the gusting wind. As I approach, I see them hugging the railing, their faces anxious to hear the news. "It's dead," I say. There are no cheers, yet the spontaneous slump of their shoulders lets me know their relief is genuine. "The tessellating gun worked then," the captain calls out, a hopeful tremor in his voice. "It works," I remember the cost. "Brother Kilkenny did not die in vain." I'm cold. Even the pressed wool coat is succumbing to the icy rain, and I quickly climb the rat-line ladder into the airship. I am welcomed with pats on the back and a few handshakes. The captain growls orders, barks commands, and makes the ship airworthy for the ascent. Miss Moffin, Amelia, approaches, her white smock smeared with black grease and her hair madly bound up in a series of random ponytails. Her face is grimy with oil, save the unmarred ring around her eyes that were protected by her fool's glass goggles. She approaches with a broader smile than I've seen on her face in a long time. Somehow in that smile I find a trickle of glee, the first allowance I've given myself that we've won a victory here, a small one, but nonetheless. She stands before me and holds out her hands. "Let me see the gun." I hand it to her, and she starts checking the inflictor mechanism, opening the breech, worrying the motivator spring, then finally attaching an absurd gauge to a jutting valve. She tests whether the salvoronic pressure is being maintained in the resonance chamber. "How many times did you fire it?" 6. "How many shots did it take to kill it?" 1. She nods. "Okay, I understand you wanted to make sure, but 6? Too many. Listen, this thing is expensive to dial up. Got it? Let's be frugal when—" I cut her off. "I know. Sorry. I wanted to make sure it was dead." She is still smiling, but around its edges I see worry creeping in. She says nothing. "Really, don't worry," I say. "It'll be all right." She nods. Then, after trying to rearrange her rat's nest hair, she turns and walks away with the gun, calling back, "I'm going to rearm this, and then I'll join you for dinner at the captain's table this evening at 6 bells. I want to hear the whole story."